Well, the ambition for North America was like every big blue chip landmark series. We're having to try to push the boundaries of what's been done before. And that's always a challenge, but it felt a particular challenge for North America because it feels such a familiar place. So I felt when we started, we had quite a mountain to climb. As it turned out, there was a lot of new stuff that we uncovered, and I felt that we really did push those boundaries. I felt the program is very fresh. Well, I spent 2 years in North America making programs, so I knew the parts of the continent quite well. But it's such a vast continent, you can't possibly know it all. It's a lifetime of work. The continent goes from Panama all the way to northern Canada, and that's the geography we were trying to cover. In terms of surprises, I think, there were landscapes that I didn't even know about. There were these vast sand dunes in Mexico. There are these wildernesses in Labrador in Canada. I mean, these are places I really didn't know much about, even having spent time there. So I feel that's quite a surprise. And then, of course, there's the wildlife. Now, some of the wildlife is very familiar. Everyone knows about bison and so on. But I still think we were able to uncover wildlife stories that were fresh. Stories about bobcats, for example, which are very unfilmed. Well, there's no art to finding stories. It is just about hard work. It's about trying to speak to as many people as possible in the field, speaking to scientists, reading papers, being on location, actually understanding what's going on. I mean, one of our great stories that we filmed, a predation sequence between bald eagles and snow geese, was uncovered by the cameraman in situ. We also filmed coyotes eating hawk moth caterpillars in Death Valley, which the park people didn't even know about. So, some of these stories come up while you're there. So what makes a great story is one that has surprise and revelation. And you have to be able to get into the character of the animal. I mean, we're going through a phase at the moment where people really enjoy getting into characters. They don't want them being sort of scientific subjects. They want to feel it's sort of anthropomorphism, not totally, but that's the way where we're going at the moment. So you want to be able to characterize your animal, but of course there's got to be a feeling of surprise and revelation at the end of the sequence. We didn't follow characters throughout the film. I mean, one of the ideas of the series was to be a definitive series about North America. And so you can't get bogged down with a single species in one program if you're trying to do that. We were trying to cover a lot of ground. But there were times when one species came back, whose story sort of came back in the middle of a film. For example, in our Plains film, we had the bison as a returning character. So we had a sequence with them being chased by wolves, and then we had them in the rut and in the snow, and it sort of felt right there because with the Plains film we were taking a more seasonal narrative. And so, that worked very well to return to characters, but on the whole, we didn't do that. One of the great challenges of filming tornadoes is just being in the right place at the right time. I mean, that's incredibly difficult. I mean, we drove 10,000 miles across several states trying to chase tornadoes, and most of the time it's a wild goose chase. And then the second challenge is making sure you stay safe, because obviously these are incredibly powerful weather events. And to do that, we had an expert storm chaser who followed us and helped us all the way through. But as filmmakers, the biggest challenge was to show something different, to try to raise the level of footage. Everybody has seen shots of tornadoes, but they're normally filmed through car windows or sort of low quality news cameras. And we wanted to step up a bit. We wanted to make it blue chip. We wanted to create a really cinematic experience. And for that, we decided to use a technique called HDR. It stands for High Dynamic Range. So we were trying to film time lapses of these storms forming. And using this technique allowed us to take multiple exposures for every frame. So that what it gives you, instead of like having burnt out areas or dark areas with no details, you've got the right exposure for every part of the frame. And so what you end up with is something almost hyper real or super real. But in actual fact, it's quite like how your eye sees it. So when you see the finished time-lapse, there's so much detail in there, and it just really pops out of the screen. And I think we got some incredible storms they're called supercells. These are the storms that produce tornadoes. And we got some incredibly impressive storms forming on these open plains. Whenever you make a wildlife series and people interview about it, they always ask about dangerous animals. In actual fact, dangerous animals are the least of our worries, because we work with wildlife, we understand how to read animals. You know, the whole point is not to get yourself so close as to create dangers. But inevitably there are times when you get too close, or an animal comes too close to you that you don't anticipate. And that often happens with bears. On one of our shoots to Labrador, when we were using this very remote cabin as a base, a polar bear tried to break into our cabin while we were sleeping. And we didn't even realise it was a polar bear until the following day. Nobody had seen a polar bear in this region for 25 years. But the first we knew of it was in the middle of the night, this rather loud snuffling sound around the cabin. We couldn't see out of the cabin because we'd put these bear shutters down on the outside before we went to bed, because there are a lot of black bears in the area. And to start with, we weren't worried at all, because we just figured it was one of these black bears. And then suddenly this bear launches itself at the door, and it makes the whole cabin shake. And there were 4 of us in this room, and we're all up looking at each other and thinking, oh my God, what is this? A massive black bear. And everything quiets down, and then it does it again. Fortunately, there were about 4 bolts on the door, and it held, and then we didn't hear anything more. And in the following morning, we went out of our cabin very gingerly and looked around, and we had our helicopter parked just by the cabin, and the helicopter door was open, and we discovered that the bear had got into the helicopter, popped the windows out, broken the seat of the pilot's seat, climbed all over our $500,000 worth of Cineflex's gyro-stabilized camera mount, but you know, and made a bit of a mess. But fortunately, it had not caused any real damage to this helicopter, so that we could still use it, because we were quite a long way from the nearest town. And later that afternoon, the bear came back, and it was only then that we discovered it was a polar bear and not a black bear. Now, polar bears are one of the only animals that do actually hunt humans, so that was a very dangerous incident. But fortunately, those moments are fairly rare. I suppose what I'm proud about is that I feel that we've achieved what we set out to achieve, trying to make a surprising revelatory series about a continent that seems, on the face of it, quite familiar. I think when people watch it, they'll be surprised by the huge variety of landscapes and the incredible animal stories that we were able to film over 2.5 years.